Good morning. Welcome to Gimpy's History Corner. The name comes from what my grandsons Alice and Archie call me. This is a picture of them at Conner Prairie, which is a great history place here in Indiana. So if you ever get a chance to go to Conner Prairie, I'd recommend it. All right, so I'm going to do the next few videos on presidential assassinations. This first one will be on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. And then we'll see how fast the next two go, and maybe two more videos on the next three assassinations. We'll see. All right, Lincoln's assassination, the war was over, or almost over. Appomattox was in 1865. And there was a famous acting family called the Booth family. Mostly Shakespearean acting. Edwin Booth was the father. His famous son was John Wilkes Booth. He was from Maryland. He was an adamant Confederacy supporter, but he never signed up to fight in the war, which was always unusual in my mind. He saw that the war was ending and Union victory and wanted to prevent it. He met with Southern spies in Canada, but we're not sure what was decided or if anything was decided at that meeting. His initial plan was to kidnap Lincoln and ransom him for Southern prisoners. But Lincoln changed his travel plans so often he could never pull off that kidnapping. On April 11th, 1865, Lincoln gave a speech from the window of the White House where he mentioned extending voting rights to freed slaves. Booth heard this and made a comment to who he was with, but that's pretty much it for Lincoln. I'm just going to kill him. So a famous theater in Washington, D.C. is Ford's Theater, and Lincoln and his wife would go there quite often during the war. And they decided to go one night after the war was over. General Grant was in town with his wife. And there was a comedy on the schedule called The American Cousin, My American Cousin. Lincoln asked General Grant to go with him with his wife, but unfortunately, Grant's wife did not get along with Lincoln's wife, and she refused to go. So they made up an excuse that they had to leave town and visit their kids. So some friends of Mary's were Major Henry Rathbone of the Union Army and his girlfriend Clara Harris. So they agreed to go with the Lincolns to Ford's Theater to see My American Cousin. Now, Booth had been working with some co-conspirators. Washington, D.C. was full of Southern spies and Southern sympathizers, as they called them. One of them was a lady named Mary Surratt, who had a boarding house there in Washington, D.C. And the co-conspirators were David Harold, Lewis Powell, and George Atzerodt. So the plan was for Booth to kill Lincoln. Lewis Powell was supposed to attack the Secretary of State, William Seward, and George Atzerodt was assigned the task of killing Vice President Drunk Johnson. And all these plans took place at Mary Surratt's boarding house, and she had a son named John who was part of the conspiracy as well. Now, Mary provided the safe house, her boarding house, and they also had a place out in the country where Mary sent some rifles to be stored for the escaped assassins. April 14th, 1865, Lincoln and his party arrive late to the theater. They get a big round of applause from those watching the show. And they're seated in the presidential box, which is up. If you're looking at the stage, it's to the right, up on the side of the wall there. And you can get to that presidential box by walking up some stairs. There was an army guard posted at the doorway into that booth, but for some reason he decided he was thirsty and he left and went next door to a tavern. That always made me very suspicious. You know, there was no Secret Service at this time, nothing to protect Lincoln, which always amazed me as well. With all the Southern sympathizers in Washington, I can't believe he went anywhere without an armed guard. But that's just the way they did things back in those days. So the Army Guard left. He was investigated, and they never did find any reason to punish him, which, gosh, dereliction of duty at least, come on. So Booth arranged to have a horse outside the theater with David Harold, one of his co-conspirators. And he went in the unlocked door. They didn't even lock the door to the presidential booth. He had a 44 caliber Derringer pistol, walked in behind Lincoln, shot him in the back of the head. Major Rathbone saw this, jumped up to stop him, to capture him, and Booth pulled out a knife and slashed Major Rathbone. Then he jumped from the presidential box down to the stage, yelled, "Sic semper tyrannis," which is thus always to tyrants. So the crowd didn't know what had gone on. They'd heard a shot, but they didn't know what was going on. They saw Booth jump down. They thought it was kind of part of the show because he was an actor. But then they started yelling from the booth, "The president's been shot." Booth hobbled off the stage out the back door onto his horse, and he left town with David Harold. I read a book called Manhunt, which is about the hunt for John Wilkes Booth. There's a picture of him shooting Lincoln. I also read this book called The Lincoln Assassination. So obviously everybody's excited. They carry Lincoln across the street to a private home, put him in a bed, and all his staff are there. His wife, of course, his wife is crazy, sad, and excited. So Booth make it across the bridge into Virginia, or into Maryland, I think, first, and had a 12-day manhunt. And they had troops out looking for him. They knew who he was. Somehow they learned about his co-conspirators, so they arrested Lewis Powell, who had attacked William Seward with a knife. Seward was already in bed with an illness, but somehow he fought off Lewis Powell. Did not kill Seward, but certainly wounded his face with a knife. Later pictures of Seward are pretty grotesque. His face is torn away. George Atzerodt was assigned to kill Vice President Johnson, and he never even showed up. He kind of got drunk and lost his nerve. Mary Surratt was at her home. her son John escaped right away to Canada and then to Europe. But they captured Lewis Powell and George Atzerodt pretty quickly. And they eventually ended up capturing, or at least surrounding, John Wilkes Booth in a barn in Port Arthur, Virginia. So he wouldn't come out. David Harold came out and they captured him. So they set fire to the barn to chase him out of the barn, and one of the Union soldiers shot through the barn, like the cracks in the wall, the gaps in the wood. Shot and wounded Booth. They dragged him out, laid him out on the porch of the house near the barn, and he eventually died. David Harold, Lewis Powell, George Atzerodt, and Mary Surratt were put on trial in front of a military tribunal, not a regular criminal court with a jury. This was a military tribunal. It's always been kind of controversial why they did that. That was Edwin Stanton's idea, and he wanted to make sure there was no legal shenanigans going on. He gave no chance for these people to get off scot-free. So they were all found guilty, and all four of them, including the woman, first woman ever hung, they were all hanged there in Washington, D.C. Mary's son, John, like I said, escaped to Canada. Then he went to Europe, got involved in some things over there. But they finally found out who he was, captured him, and sent him back to the United States, where he went on trial, a regular trial this time, not a military tribunal. And the jury could not come down with a 100% verdict either way. So it was a hung jury, and he was set free. The other guy that got in trouble was a doctor, where when Booth fell or jumped to the stage, broke his leg, he went to Dr. Mudd's house out in the country. Dr. Mudd set the leg, wrapped it up so he could ride, and he was first convicted of being a co-conspirator, but then they decided he really wasn't part of the plan. He just helped a guy that came to his house with a broken leg, so he was set free. So that's the first presidential assassination in our history. I'm going to cover the next three, either on the next video or at least the next two on the next video, and save the biggest one for a separate video. Okay, well, my Reds lost last night. Daggone Pirates. They're in the last place in the division, but they beat up on the Reds all the time. Oh my gosh. Now the Reds are back out of the playoff by one game. I think they got their best pitcher going against Pirates' best pitcher tonight, so we'll see how that goes. It's supposed to rain. My son's going if it doesn't rain, so come on, Reds, hang in there. Do a good job these next 2 weeks. Thank you. Have a great day.